Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And today, as we're recording this, it is November 12th, 2024. This is one of those things where I've been meaning to talk about for a while because I've seen a lot of articles written about it recently. But when I looked at our very convoluted RSS page, I was surprised no one's ever talked about it before. So this is new. We've talked a lot about things surrounding it, but we have never done an episode on the Manosphere, which is what we're talking about today. That being said, probably no surprise to people who are familiar, content warning for non-explicit discussions of rape, sexual assault, violence against women, racism, and misogyny. Yep. You can also see our past episodes on incels, tradwives, men going their own way or MGTOW, misogynoir, Why Didn't You Believe Her, white women and white supremacy, and Brett Kavanaugh. Also, probably our whole trauma miniseries, to be honest, but also the Monday mini I did about like not being pretty enough, which I'll talk about a little bit more. All right. So first, let us define manosphere. The generally accepted definition is that the manosphere refers to a network of social media groups and websites, not necessarily directly connected to each other, that all share the common belief that men are oppressed by and victims of feminism and women. The manosphere breaks down into four main groups: men's rights activists, pickup artists, men going their own way, and involuntary celibates or incels. Some people also particularly carve out red pill men. So
I think we need to just put men in podcasting, and then there's a part 5 to this, because that was a big discussion I've been seeing recently about how men podcasts or right-wing podcasts, men in podcasts, Joe Rogan, really influenced Gen Zers. And I was like, that's a whole episode. Anyway, back to. So
we're going to briefly talk about that, but yes, it is a whole episode.
I'm just like, I feel like they need their own category now, men and podcasts.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to. So the manosphere has been around since the early days of the internet in the 2000s, but more modernly really took off in response to the 2017 #MeToo movement, first invented by activist Tarana Burke in 2006, and other online feminist movements and conversations. It should come as no surprise to anyone that anti-feminist groups have existed since feminism has. They've been existing even before feminism has, let's just be real honest. Yeah. The internet has just given them the platform to reach more people.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot to you. If you want to read more, there's plenty more to read about this, but you can read the history of especially second wave feminism in the 70s and how all of these other groups of men formed against that. There's always kind of a backlash. But yes, we already know that networks like this can and have led to violence, often against women, and that young boys and men, people at large, but young boys and men particularly, can be radicalized by these spaces. And a lot of these instances of violence, prior to committing them, the perpetrator had been really active in misogynist, anti-feminist online communities, many of them racist, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, homophobic, and far right-leaning. Many also have connections to white supremacist groups, neo-Nazis, and alt-right organizations or communities, if they're not that already themselves. Something we've talked about a lot too, a lot of these online platforms not only don't do a good job at protecting their users and preventing hate speech, if they do it at all, their algorithms also boost posts like these and facilitate the growth and radicalization of people in these communities. People can be anonymous and they can get around a lot of censorship because of that and can find like-minded individuals. And you can see we did kind of a mini series that we didn't really plan or announce, but we did a lot of technology stuff at the beginning of last year. And we talked about that with YouTube and most of the platforms we discussed. All right, so since Me Too often comes up in the discussion around the rise of the manosphere, let's talk about how that looks when it comes to these misogynist online spaces. And yes, we have talked about many times before that this was a huge movement where women were encouraged to share their stories of sexual assault online, primarily on social media. Anti-feminist and anti-women online communities lashed out in response, going so far as to call it a feminist conspiracy, at first, especially against straight white men. Many discussed rape as like it's not a thing at all. They said it was like, what are we even talking about? There was a common undercurrent of perceived male victimization and a desire to go back to patriarchal values they felt were under attack or being eroded. There was a general sense of fear of being accused of committing sexual assault and an outcry about how feminism was ruining their self-esteem, that they were being discriminated against. It was a toxic support network these men were building. And a lot of times it is framed as a support network, as in, we can help you, men. If you're feeling bad, come here. With the general idea that women were the problem in one way or another, and that they needed to return to their natural submissive state, and feminism needed to end.
Mm-hmm. So after Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's hearing about the allegations of sexual assault leveled against him, the hashtag him too was trending. So here's a quote. "We've all seen the horror stories. Men work their entire lives to build a legacy, and then with one fell swoop, a mere allegation with zero proof to back it up destroys their lives." Anney, did I tell you that this is one of the things that my mom brought up in our conversation during my I'm going to be a part of a feminist podcast, in which she said, these allegations are ruining men's life, and it was so long ago. He's changed now. Why won't they let him change?
Yeah. Well, we are going to briefly touch on that too, because of there's a lot. I'm very sorry you had to deal with that. There's a lot to unpack there. But that idea, that always bothered me too, when people would defend Donald Trump and they'd be like, that was so long ago. I was like, he was 60 years old. He was 60 years old.
And his reasoning is never, I would never do such a thing. I'm an upright citizen. It's always, she's not pretty. Why?
Exactly.
What the?
Exactly. And it wouldn't have been like, I don't really care about the age. It's just the hypocrisy of the argument.
He's a child until he dies, apparently.
Right. And Brett Kavanaugh is on the Supreme Court. So, like, Trump, president again.
He currently is like 30-something convictions. Like, he's actually convicted.
Yes. So, this comment just makes me...
ruining their lives, right?
We're ruining their lives. And like the people he works with, the people he surrounds himself with. And a lot of this rhetoric is very like, oh, women are just vessels to bear children. That comes up a lot in these spaces. The idea that they're, quote, leftovers once they're over 23, which sounds very reminiscent of J.D. Vance's childless cat ladies comments. So it's like, we're going to come to the election. But it's when we're talking about this, it is very prominent in what's happening right now in our politics. So during this discourse, many of the commenters went out of their way to discuss the desirability of the women in question when it came to Me Too. Like, yeah, she's never would anyone sexually assault her, which is horribly gross. In their opinion, many of the people who came forward were unattractive. Some even went so far as to accuse them of dealing with rejection issues, which, wow. I know. Many of the comments were racially charged and full of harmful stereotypes, often bringing out scientific reasons women were inferior. They accused women of being witches and pedophiles. They claimed the legal system protected women from any punishment for their alleged abuses. So basically, they flipped the conversation so that women were the abusers of men. And as mentioned, their comments were often very racist, fatphobic, transphobic, homophobic, and contradictory. Again, it's like, I know we all know that. They were so contradictory. Overall, they dismissed the sexual assault bit altogether, or argued that it should be legal against women. and went straight to worrying and raging about how this might hurt men. Some would say that men can be victims too, which is true. But rather than talking about getting justice for all victims, they argued that women don't have a right to justice until men get it first. Some also claim that consent is confusing and it's on women to stop any unwanted attack, and therefore any attack on them is legitimate because they didn't stop it. Here's a quote from one of these websites. Why is rape bad? In our modern Western culture, girls have lay counts in the double and triple digits. What does an extra dick matter? Sex feels good, and women who are being raped can also orgasm, implying an element of enjoyment. Finally, if women never fought back, it would not be fun for the guy, as many violent rapes are a power thing where the guy enjoys the woman fighting back. Just disgusting. In this case, the commenter is implying that women with sexual experience deserve to be raped, or it doesn't matter because they've had a lot of sex, and that women enjoy rape unless they fight back, and even then men enjoy that too. According to this commenter, others suggested recording any sexual encounter without consent to have evidence in case they were accused. So like setting up cameras. Others suggested violent punishment and even murder if a woman threatened to accuse him of sexual assault. They often used women to legitimize their comments too. So like my mother says, my wife says, and almost to be like nostalgic for a time before women talked about sexual assault in public. Like my mother says, wandering hands are just a thing. Stuff like that. Another frequent complaint was that women were taking jobs from men. And then another one was about child custody. Both women unfairly getting child custody or women expecting too much in child care and child payments if they did. Again, contradictory. Okay. So that was Me Too 2017. Here we are again. There has been an even more recent rise in the Manosphere. Podcast is a part of it, in part boosted by the first election of Donald Trump, who echoes the sentiment of a lot of these comments in public appearances. And we will get to that in a minute. But from all of this confusion and hate, some male influencers, or manfluencers as they're called, saw a business opportunity. They made content around how boys and men weren't the problem. It was everyone else, especially women and feminists. Here are some of the big examples, and shout out to Eamon Whalen's piece, The Men Fight Back, over on Mother Jones for helping us pull this together. So, psychology professor Jordan Peterson, he came up in 2016 after he protested a measure that would require teachers in Canada to use a student's preferred pronoun, and the videos went viral. People who liked him saw him as someone who was under attack by SJWs. He was a very father figure. To cater to this newfound audience, he released lectures aimed towards young men like the Marxist lie of white privilege. He went on tour and wrote a best-selling book. He claims he is not part of the Manosphere and that people that are, quote, deceptive narcissists, all while being in conversation with some of them. He's a social Darwinist and a big proponent of looking to nature to explain what he views as the, quote, natural social hierarchies. He talks about lobsters a lot. He is seen as an early version of this toxic men's self-help era that has emerged. We've spoken before about this misguided and incorrect biodeterminist argument. It is very popular in the Manosphere.
Mm-hmm. So science fiction writer and publisher Theodore Robert Beale, who is also a Christian nationalist, racist, misogynist, and anti-Semitic, expanded on what he reviewed as simplistic denominations of men in 2010. Via The Guardian, he, quote, came up with his own social sexual hierarchy with alphas at the top, the male elite, the leaders of men for whom women naturally lust, followed by betas, deltas, gammas, lambdas, right down to omegas, the losers. Sitting outside this imaginary pyramid of masculinity were sigmas, the lone wolves. Bill defined sigmas as, quote, outsiders who don't play the social game and manage to win at it anyhow, and who, quote, often like women, but also tend to be contemptuous of them. They're on par with alphas, but just don't show off about it.
This is how they explain, like, because a lot of times in these groups, they hate the alphas because they're not the alphas.
Right.
The sigma is like your lone wolf. He's not an alpha, so I can like him kind of guy.
So is this one of those, like, I'm not like other guys? I'm not like other type of conversations?
I'm not like the other guys
dude.
Women are attracted to.
Yeah.
And they're very, very simplistic view.
It feels like it's kind of one of those, the rebellious dude, the emo boy in high school in my era. That was kind of like, that's the one everybody lusted after, the Jared Leto. So my so-called life era. They just watch a lot of 90s films, I feel like.
Oh my gosh. We are going to talk about this, but they've got an aesthetic. And Sigmas, by the way, went on to become a meme in 2021. And I wish I could just laugh at so much of this stuff, but because it's like doing actual damage, it's hard. They don't seem to realize it's become a meme, but it has.
I mean, it's kind of a constant with them, isn't it?
Yeah.
They don't understand that they're like, oh no, we're not agreeing with you. We're just more like sarcastic.
Making fun of you.
Oh, but anyway, so Mike Ceranovich, former attorney turned pickup artist, blogger turned digital MAGA warrior, he wrote about topics like how he didn't believe date rape was a thing and how to choke a woman. He wrote a best-selling book and sold supplements. Why is it always supplements? There's always supplements involved, I swear. Anyway, he played a big role in the harassment of women during Gamergate, and he once said, quote, if a Republican acted like me and ran for office, it'd be a movement. Donald Trump has proven me right. People are tired of p***s. So the self-titled president of the Manosphere, Anthony Dream Johnson, host of the 21 Convention and founder of 21 University, the #1 school for men, which is a YouTube channel. He sells hats with slogans like, make women cook again, make women virgins again, which, and make women thin again. And he's been around since 2006.
Yeah. It was kind of, again, it's so hard to find any joy in any of this, but it was kind of funny when people were writing about him because they were like, oh, he's the old, no one cares about him in the manosphere anymore. But he's still around. He's still doing damage. Don't you doubt it.
Oh, no, for sure.
Yeah. And then there's the anonymous Bronze Age pervert, or BAP, who was later identified as Yale political science PhD, Costin Alamario. He wrote The Bronze Age Mindset, and it has fans, both in young conservative men, but also in people like Trump's speechwriter and our Ron DeSantis employee who basically said it should be required reading. In this work, he wrote about how beautiful the man's body is and harkens back to ancient cultures and Western civilization, claiming that women have drained men's vital essence and compared immigrants to hordes of zombies. He went on to write for the magazine Man's World, which is sort of all about lifting weights and eating meat to be more masculine. Another thing that comes up a lot in the manosphere, testicles. Fitness YouTuber Elliot Hulse is a prime example. He was radicalized through YouTube comments. It's actually an interesting case study because usually we think of the content creator radicalizing people, but he was radicalized by his commenters. Anyway, he first experimented with the occult before becoming a Christian nationalist. He blamed feminism on Karl Marx and Satan. Then later he converted to Islam and started espousing the benefits of, quote, weaponized chastity, going on to hold a talk, dominate your wife, dominate your life, which he did with his wife. But yeah, he did a lot of sperm stuff, like sperm retention. I think he was involved in that Tucker Carlson thing where he was talking, that documentary, documentary is a strong word, that thing he did where he was talking about like exposing your testicles to UV waves or whatever.
Oh.
Yeah.
All of that, I really could not, I swear, these were blended with Onion articles that I couldn't remember what was actual truth or was actually was a satire.
I know. It's real. Okay. And then there's Kevin Samuels, who's often credited with forming the Black Manosphere. So after Trump was elected, a lot of the racism inherent in many of these spaces created the opportunity for the rise of the Black Manosphere. So basically, like, I don't want to be here because you're being really racist, but still got some thoughts about this. For instance, several comments in at least one foundational manifesto included languages around white women dating men of color and how, quote, wrong it was. Enter Samuels, who rose to popularity in 2020 when he pivoted from reviewing cologne fragrances towards degrading and condescending dating advice aimed towards Black women, mostly Black women. He also had a cameo on the show Atlanta and was in a promo video with Future. He died in 2022. Similarly, the podcast Fresh and Fit has a very, very same vibe where the host bring on Black women to insult them.
Right. And they originally wasn't like that. They it went, and there's other podcasters similar to this that kind of got raked over the coals because their entire platform was like they're the good guys, and that's kind of how Fresh and Fit began. They seemed like cool guys who were like, oh, good, we've got people from the Black community profiting off of podcasting. Thank goodness, because it's, podcasting. We've talked about this. It's it wasn't diverse for a very long time, and it's still typically not. Still technically not, and now men are still making way more money than women in general. But Fresh and Fit was one of those that people were like, oh, good, something different. And then they started getting more and more and more and more like sexist and misogynist and misogynoir that it became like, what is happening? And they went into the alt-right platform. I don't know. So there's another podcast called and Gigs, and it's spelled SHXTS in Gigs. And they were also they were supposed to be the remedy to Fresh and Fit, I think. They were an English Black podcasters. And then they came to Atlanta and said some really degrading things about Black women. And they were like, oh, that was your entire audience. What were you thinking? And it has something to the balance of, and I think this might be a whole conversation, the balance of fitness. They were kind of originating with fitness content and then comedy content, and then it went into this, and they didn't mean to. They just their mask slipped for a second, and they got called out real hard. I haven't seen, because usually this is the pipeline that we see, is when they finally show their actual opinions, then they start going ahead and leaning that way in order to make money off of that content.
Yeah.
So I'm like, there's this conversation of they originally started out this way and they had a great audience. What that was that made them popular. And then it faded into this, and you're like, what happened? Right.
And that we are going to talk about that a little, because anyone who knows anything about this knows we're going to have to talk about Andrew Tate. I know, I'm sorry, but it has to be done.
That's a content warning on its own.
I know, honestly, here it is. Sorry.
Sorry.
But
we laugh because we're in distress.
No, honestly, we do. One of the defenses the lawyer gave was, which I don't believe, but one of the defenses he gave was he doesn't believe it makes money.
Right.
He saw this was an opportunity, it made him money.
An act.
And so he did it. And I do think it's interesting how many of these cases, they did start as something else, and then they became these far-right personalities. But anyway, many of the big names in the Black Manosphere are a proponent of the, quote, save yourself Black men philosophy, which teaches Black men that they can improve their situation by distancing themselves from Black women and communities. One of these proponents wrote, save yourself Black men is not about saving the Black community. As far as we are concerned, the Black community is dead, and Black women were the ones who killed it. There's a couple really good articles about this, and there's a really good NPR Code Switch episode about this, where one of the Black women, described her experience online dating, and she started to pick up on like these words people would use, and they just kept coming up, and they're so popular inside these manospheres that, like, if you don't know about it, you don't. But they were she started to pick up on, like, oh, that is, you are consuming some kind of online content that is damaging and bad, and I do not want to be with you.
Right. So writer and historian Aaron Fountain Jr. has been looking into the rise of manosphere, and he wrote this. The white manosphere is trying to reverse the hands of time to regain a patriarchy that they felt that they lost. The black manosphere, on the other hand, are trying to gain a sense of patriarchy that they were never entitled to. And that's a big sentence. Like that, yes.
Yeah.
I feel like we could also say that too, like Latino creators and all of that. Asian creators.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because Under the Influence just went through a huge reckoning, who was an all-Asian cast with 2 Asian women and 2 Asian men. And they went through it because not only did they call out Drew Afualo, who is a big feminist, like, we've talked about her before, and just like the calling out. And she like, you go negative, I'm going to go 10 times worse type of content. But like, she's always kept it real in that, like, it's abrasive. But, it's one of those, like, she's like, oh, you want to call me fat? Let's go type of conversation. And they called her out. And then the conversation came out where the Asian woman content podcaster was like, there's a rumor about women's vaginas, and went into this. And then there was a whole conversation, pretty much like a racist conversation. It all started popping off, and it's under podcast, and they were making a lot of money. And then they lost it. Like, they have lost it all and have repeatedly tried to do damage control, but it's not working. And I love that for them. But it's interesting because that's exactly, that would follow under this as well. The fact that you are trying to gain something that you were never welcome to. And will never be welcome to.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, there is a really good episode on NPR Code Switch that is all about this, because during the build up to the election, the people were, worried. And so they did an episode called Diving into the Black Manosphere. But one of the points they bring up, that is during the pandemic and in our gig economy, a lot of us were spending a lot more time isolated online or listening to podcasts, and how that has contributed to this rise that we see all over, which is not specific to the Black Manosphere, but that's just what they were focusing on. They also broke down the long history of gender and race politics after Black men gained the right to vote, but Black women did not. So I really recommend it. But the GOP did lean into that. Trump said, I'm going through the roof with Black men. Black men, I don't do quite as well with Black women, I must say. And they had a strategy to get Black men not to vote. But yeah, this is also exists in other racial groups where marginalized men leave the largely white male-dominated manosphere due to their lack of discussions about race or their racial slurs and racism, all of it to form their own communities. So yeah. But here we go. Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The so-called king of toxic masculinity. Most of you are probably familiar with Andrew Tate, but he was a former professional kickboxer and a reality show contestant that then went on to become an influencer on social media. And he really made a name for himself for being the most misogynist playboy, even offering a video course about how to sleep with more women that he titled PhD, or Pimpin' Host Degree. He had what he called his Hustlin' University. He was very big on look how rich I am, and you can do it too. Just pay me money and I'll give you this class, which is what a lot of them do, by the way. But he was very look at my Bugatti, I think is the thing that they say. His videos on TikTok have over 12 billion views. At one point, he was the 8th most Googled person in the world. He was banned from most platforms in 2022 and then arrested on allegations of rape, exploitation for pornography, and human trafficking. He was released under house arrest, and his as I said, his attorney argued that it was all an act, which is funny because he was banned from Twitter for saying women should bear some responsibility for being raped. But Elon Musk reinstated him when he took over. In a deleted video, he claimed he moved to Romania because of their less harsh punishments for rape and allegedly texted a woman, "I loved raping you." And he was tweeting during the election, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But yeah, he's still around. So if it was an act, still doing it.
And acting really proud of something he didn't do.
Yeah. Yep. Popular podcaster Joe Rogan comes up in this conversation too. As you said, Samantha, we should probably do a whole thing on just what's going on in men's podcasts. But in these spaces, the people we're mentioning are heroes. They are father figures. They are older brothers. They are teaching young boys and men how to be a man in that very patriarchal sense. Recent studies have found that these anti-feminist, misogynistic views are forming younger than in previous years, in part thanks to access to these online spaces. Studies have also found links between toxic masculinity and sexual violence.
I don't know why I'm like, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
It feels obvious, but they were like, see,
surprise!
Here it is.
What? So a 2024 UK report deemed the violence against women and girls there a national emergency and concluded the rise of radicalization amongst men and boys are terrifying. They were reporting the equivalent to 3,000 crimes a day.
That they were linking to this.
Right.
An early 2024 study out of the UK, found that 6 out of 10 boys aged 11 to 14 had been exposed to misogynistic content online. It also found that about 60% were led to this content with AI algorithms. Multiple reports have found teachers struggling to combat with this, especially the popularity of Andrew Tate. Multiple countries have had reports about this with teachers and Andrew Tate in the struggle. People surveyed reported a rise in things like rape jokes and a rewarding of bad behavior. So like in one instance, some boys maybe made a rape joke and they basically just got to like go sit outside for a while. Right. They got out of class, essentially.
Right. Well, we also know when they harass young women, they don't do anything either, and they punish both. In school, oftentimes. So here's a quote from a Teen Vogue op-ed by Lex McManaman called "Andrew Tate and the Manosphere Show How Far Hating Women Can Get You." So they write, cue the objectionable, misleading headlines reminding us to be kinder to men, to cater to boys, to basically go all in on reinforcing patriarchy in hopes that it soothes humiliation and saves lives, that feminists are undervaluing men's emotions, and that's why romantic relationships aren't working, that personal writing is getting ruined by women's self-victimizing tendencies. Essentially, that feminism is focusing too much on women and not enough on men, ad nauseum, until I have an aneurysm, I guess.
Yes, and it goes on. The algorithm isn't some kind of abstract, preordained divine creation. It's basically the preferences of the guys who wrote it, made it into a machine churning away, writes economist Umair Haque. The fame of manfluencers is created. It's not some kind of natural phenomenon reflecting some kind of innate desire of the male psyche. So all of this has been connected to the rise of angry white men during the first Trump presidency and what is called aggrieved entitlement. And it is something that comes up whenever Bridget comes on and talks about technology, is why that's so important, who's making this technology. And I remember walking home soon after the 2016 election, and a group of boys was just chanting, "Grab her by the pussy," to every woman who walked by.
Right.
So there's definitely, they were pretty young.
Right. And now the new chant is "Your body, my choice."
Yep, which we're going to talk about. Oh, no. Okay. So a lot of this content is interspersed throughout with jokes or unrelated anecdotes. Andrew Tate was very good at that. So the creator can pull off the classic, "It was a joke." So you could start to watch something and not know how toxic it is. And one of the studies we're referencing in here, they did one that was like overtly, this is, and then they did one that was very much framed as like, this is a support group. But once you kind of dug into it, Mm-mm. Mm-mm. They frequently claim that they are evidence-based. They are not. They say they would never vote for a politician who is a woman. And yeah, to reiterate, these creators are making bank. Major corporations make money off of credibly accused and convicted Manosphere folks while laying off their own employees. Popular media does play a role as well. That could be a whole separate episode, but there have been a lot of articles written about characters like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, one of their heroes, who also embodies the hustler aspect that's common throughout all of these things. Homelander from The Boys, Joaquin Phoenix is the Joker, but not the new one, heaven forbid. Or they're like guiding stars for those in the Manosphere, even though they are often completely misinterpreting satire or critique of those characters. Yep. And DeSantis played on this very year, showing some of these characters in a political ad, which I have to say was very homoerotic. And I wish I could just laugh at it instead of it having political ramifications, but it was very homoerotic.
I mean, that was half of like Trump, people idealizing and idolizing Trump and making him into these weird caricature figures with like the muscular dude or like over the, like, what are y'all doing? This is a joke, right?
So much of this is obsession around like muscles, and this Ron DeSantis ad had like sweaty men wrestling with each other. I was shocked that no one was like, hi.
This is odd.
But that's why when you said like so many of these are supplements, it's because a lot of it is I will sell you this fitness XYZ.
Right.
And then you can get the women because that's all it takes, I guess. And unfortunately, we should also probably come back to this. We're getting a lot of homework on this one. There are a lot of global examples. We're mostly talking about the United States in this, but these manfluencers and others that we have not mentioned truly have become a global influence. They have a global reach. There have been recent articles from South Korea, Australia, India, and Kenya about the damage of them, just to name a few. And the effects have been pretty horrific. Like, I was reading accounts from women in Kenya, and they were saying it felt so sudden. Like, this was not a problem before, but then he starts using this terminology, and then he becomes violent, and then, like, and it's these manosphere spaces. Also, this has been a long time on my list, but women hating women, because this is not just men who are a part of this. It is important to note that women can be a part of these communities as well in some capacity, because like we talked about with incels, there's sort of a like, you can be, but only down here. Or they have their own anti-feminist, anti-women communities. Tradwives is a good example. TERFs, good example. The whole not like other women idea. So they are a part of these online spaces, and they are influencers in them. They are consumers of them. And even if they aren't, they can pick that stuff up from usually the men in their lives. I did think about a Knives Out, Glass Onion, where there was that character who was dating Dave Bautista, and he was a manfluencer, and she was doing like playing it up and like, oh, I also love women and boobs. Ah. But then later when she's being honest, she's like, oh yeah, I'm just using that to get a leg up. So I don't know. There's a whole conversation to be had about women in Trump's cabinet in all of this. There's a conversation to be had about confirmation bias, which is when, in this case, when women are afraid of proving stereotypes correct. So they don't, like, usually it's like, oh, it's like in a personal example, I dropped out of calculus because I was afraid of proving the stereotype correct that women are bad at math. So I think that's part of this too. And it does influence women even if you disagree, because you can see my Monday mini I did about not being pretty enough to be raped, for one example. So this stuff is there. And then when you're looking at white women and white supremacy, going for Trump twice, I think this is a combo of white supremacy and hating other women. It's placing whiteness over gender. But yes, there are many examples of women and white women making this content, like this same, in this manosphere, even though the people in the manosphere are like, that's cute.
Right. Right.
I'll accept you, but...
Right. I mean, Nara Smith is kind of a great example of truly disassociating her identity for gain. I guess I don't know. As like a person of color, a woman of color who has come into this, she never says anything about being a trad wife. She kind of just keeps it low with the my husband wants this, so I'm going to make this from scratch. He wanted gum, so I'm going to make it from scratch by this with this very calm and soothing voice. I think it did come out that her husband is a Trump supporter. Like he finally admitted to it, or like he endorsed Trump. I don't know, but everybody's kind of like, what are you doing? And her feeding into this narrative because it's making her money, and she doesn't care, because as long as she is quote unquote safe. Now she's not saying all this, but this is the attitude that is bringing it on. Like she doesn't care, because for her, this is making her money. This is making him money. She's getting to do all these things, and the popularity alone is enough. But the amount of money she's getting as a content creator is over the top. And she's really just like disassociating the fact that, hey, you're about to get all of this taken away from you. Like, and you're only being accepted because you're playing their part that they are allowing you to play. The submissive wife that does whatever he wants at the drop of the dime, having 16 children. That's not how many children, but you know what I mean. It's an interesting conversation, but just also with white women in general. Like there's this interview, I don't know if you saw this interview, where this woman who is a Trump supporter, I think she did some things with the campaign, was like, I'm the VP of this organization that is supporting Trump, but I would love to be at home not doing this. And this is what's going to be great, is when Trump gets into support, I can be a wife and not have to worry about all these things that like...
You could have done that.
You can do that. What is stopping you? Like,
I would have been happy for you to do it.
That's the whole point of that choice. We want you to do what it is that you want to do. And if it's to be a stay-at-home mom, just make sure you find that partner that's going to support. Which sounds like is the problem, not other women. So I don't understand.
Right. Well, there was and I keep coming back to this, even though it happened in 2016, but there was a brief interview I saw of a woman who was a Trump supporter. And the interviewer was just asking her why she wouldn't vote for Clinton. And she was like, well, I think, women aren't leadership material. And she listed a bunch of reasons. And then he was like, but you own your own automobile shop, right? And she's like, oh yeah, I'm really good. And he was like, so do you think that you can't lead it? And she was like, oh, no.
Not me.
I'm really good. Yeah. So like that dissonance, that disconnect of like, I'm not like those other girls.
Right.
I am. Because we still demonize women so much. It's the lesser.
It doesn't make sense. It's like, no. For me, it's okay.
Right.
For you, absolutely not. Absolutely
I'm the exception
not.
here.
Right. Again, it's kind of that conversation of like, they can't suck it up. Why do they have to shake things up? We just want it to stay what it is. But at the same time, they're the one that's making progress. Like they don't even realize they're part of the progress. And you're like, baby.
It's right there.
It's
right there.
And this same woman that I was talking about talks about how she doesn't think women should be allowed to vote. And I'm like, you are the leadership of an organization for what?
Yes. Oh,
Why are you here? Why are you here?
It's a great question, Samantha. It's a great question. But yes, all of this does, unfortunately, bring us to the recent presidential election results, which was influenced by a lot of this and has given even more credence to these toxic ideas amongst these communities. Soon after Trump's win was announced, incels started posting the slogan, "Your body, my choice." It was popularized by white supremacist Nick Fuentes, who said on election night, "We control your bodies. Guess what? Guys win again. Okay? Men win again. There will never, ever be a female president. It's over. Glass ceiling is a glass made of bricks." Another variation is "We own your bodies now." And there have been reports of young boys chanting this in classes. There were also violent memes and calls for rape squads.
Right. And unfortunately, Andrew Tate has also been active on Twitter saying, "I saw a woman crossing the road today, but I just kept my foot down. Right of way? You no longer have rights."
That's like one of the least offensive things he said. But yep, there's been similar racist phrases proliferating too. And now there have been a lot of recent studies done about how often these are either bots or young men that like wilt when discovered, like children. But I think we should keep it in mind that it doesn't negate the fact that this is harmful, silencing the symptom of much larger issues. And there are plenty of people who think this and are making money off of it. Trump appeared on these shows. He appealed to the Manosphere with his very do whatever you want, say whatever you want, be rich, no consequences attitude. He thanked them by name in a recent speech. He's got his whole like love of UFC, of wrestling. It fits right in. Mm-hmm. People who consume this content are far more likely to be pro-authoritarian, pro-dictator, pro-fascism because they believe in this strong man narrative. They also argue that women and people of color, depending on the group, shouldn't have the right to vote. So yeah, it wasn't just that woman who's saying that. And to be clear, all of this has contributed to an uptick of sexual assault, violence, and murder, including the increase in men slaying their entire families, which I know has been on our list for a while to talk about, but it came up doing this research. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done here. It's not going to be easy. Thank you to all the journalists who are reporting on this, who have often been harassed or doxxed or silenced by publishers unwilling to publish their work. There are some basic, like having more women and marginalized folks in tech would be great. Holding platforms accountable would be great. There are organizations and resources online, especially for guardians who are seeing this in their children or want to prevent it. So you can look that up. Those do exist, and there are people doing this often very difficult work that could get you harassed online or worse.
Right.
So,
also, now that I'm thinking about it, we need to figure out where are we going to go, like social media wise, because obviously Twitter is nah, Facebook is a nah, Instagram is also nah. So where are we going, Anney? And TikTok's going to be banned. Y'all, where's everybody meeting at, fam? Fam, where y'all at? Speaking of tech.
Like, Trump will be interesting about TikTok because the billionaire convinced him not to ban it.
Oh.
But then he got real mad about it.
But then he's going to get real control. It's going to how much he's going to blame things on China. We have to see about that. He might try to distract from what's been happening with Russia recently, but who knows? All of that to say is, fam, where are we at? Blue Sky, I heard that's a thing. Are we going back to Discord? We talked about that for a minute.
We did. Well, let us know, listeners.
Where we go?
And funnily enough, you could still contact us in those places. So please let us know if you have any thoughts about this. And yeah, if you just have any topics you want us to cover, any resources you want us to shout out, you can email us at stephanie@momstuff@iheartmedia. You can find us on Twitter @momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff I Never Told You. We're also on YouTube. We have a TeePublic store and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.